1960. Cuero is 87 years old. This is the story of Cuero, the nation, and the world during that very fascinating year. The best selling book was the Bible, and people own more cats than dogs. They also never left out calling a communist country the likes up. It was very much a personalized local daily paper that reported national and world news and the happenings of this community. Reading the newspaper in 1960 was quite different than nowadays. Personal information, such as who was admitted and discharged from the hospital, who came into town for a visit, who was hosting a party, to who bought new cars, and mouth-watering recipes galore was in the newspaper. Kind of comparable to what you would see someone posting on Facebook today. And a hefty dose of bluntness to the penmanship as well. The population of DeWitt County is 20,683. Cuero had 7,338 citizens, while the DeWitt County side of Yoakum had 5,761, and Yorktown's population was 2,527. Only the DeWitt County side of Yoakum is included in this count since Yoakum is half DeWitt County and half Lavaca County. This is the year that Alaska and Hawaii will experience their first U.S. presidential election. Alaska became the 49th state on January the 3rd, 1959, and Hawaii became the 50th state on August the 21st, 1959. The new 50-star flag of the U.S., designed after the admission of Hawaii and Alaska, was erased officially for the first time July the 4th. The ceremony took place in Baltimore at Fort McHenry, where Francis Scott Key wrote the national anthem. The Statue of Liberty turned 75. Here she stands wearing a 50-star American flag. The 20 by 40 flag was donated to Miss Liberty by the Ladies Auxiliary of the VFW. Some popular songs of 1960. Kathy's Clown by the Everly Brothers, Are You Lonesome Tonight by Elvis Presley, The Twist by Chubby Checker, Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny by Brian Hyland, Save the Last Dance for Me by the Drifters, and A Summer's Place by Piercy Faith. Popular TV shows: Gunsmoke, Wagon Train, The Andy Griffin Show, Rawhide, Candy Camera, The Price is Right, Bonanza, The Flintstones, The Red Skelton Show, Dennis the Menace, and Route 66. Popular 1960 movies: The Little Shop of Horrors, The Alamo, GI Blues with Elvis Presley, Swiss Family Robinson, Spartacus, and Psycho. The Alamo premiere with John Wayne was held at the Woodlawn Theater in San Antonio. Joe Morrow, an up-and-coming new face in 1960 films, was a real beauty that was born in Cuero, Texas. She spent most of her life growing up in San Diego, California, and won a Be a Star contest which landed her a contract with 20th Century Fox, with a film debut in Gary Cooper's 10 North Frederick. She quickly moved on to Columbia Pictures, which had a weight clause in the contract. She stated, I love candy, but I can't have any until I'm below 132. And my doctor says I must weigh at least 132, so I just can't have any candy. In February, Jo Morrow was featured in a 2-page spread in Look magazine. She is known for her role in Our Man in Havana and numerous movies and TV shows. Elvis Presley completes 2 years in the U.S. Army, has a new hit movie, GI Blues, and a hit song, Are You Lonesome Tonight? Cuero National Guard Armory construction started in 1960. The building is now home to Parkside Family Clinic, one of Cuero Regional Hospital's clinics. The Army drafted 7,000 men in August, 1,000 more than in July, 2,000 more than in June. The August call will bring it to 2,539,930 total number of men drafted since conscription was revived during the Korean War. Tensions with Vietnam, Cuba, and Russia were high and the Cold War was in full swing. The Office of Civilian Defense Administration recommends that every home in the United States have an atomic fallout shelter due to the Cold War threat with Russia. The fear was very real that Russia would send an atomic bomb to the US. Thankfully, that never happened. When Fidel Castro first gained power, the American business community had not been overly alarmed with some of the changes in Cuba. Instead, their perception was that the Cuban economy was structurally resistant to fundamental change. During 1959, U.S. companies invested 63 million, which was larger than most of the years since World War II. Castro believed that Cuba could only be fully independent and achieve social and economic development if the government was able to broaden trade patterns within the world. This led to seeking Russian economic support. In the US, there was an increasing dismay in the growing numbers of the Cuban Communist Party. In February 1960, a Soviet trade delegation arrived in Havana, and the Soviet-Cuban Pact was agreed upon. Cuba agreed to sell 425,000 tons of sugar to the Soviet Union in 1960 and 1 million tons in each of the following 4 years. Soviet goods, including 6 million barrels of oil annually, would constitute 80% of the payments. The remaining 20% was to be paid in convertible currency. The Soviet Union also granted Cuba a loan of 100 million at 2.5% annual interest for the purchase of Soviet bloc machinery and material, and agreed to provide Cuba with technical assistance for the construction of plants and facilities. In the US, the trade pact was viewed as an open invitation for the extension of communist influence too close to home and provoked confrontation. In May, Cuban authorities ordered Standard Oil, Texaco, and Shell to refine Soviet petroleum in their Cuban plants. The companies refused because of the 600 million the Cuban government owed the oil companies now exceeded the value of their facilities. Cuba took over the oil facilities and nationalized the refineries. In July, the sugar embargo began when President Eisenhower cut Cuba's sugar quota from the U.S. market at 700,000 tons, the balance of the quota for 1960, and fixed any future quota at zero. This move was devastating because Cuba sold an average of 3 million tons of sugar each year to the U.S. at prices that have been kept artificially high by laws designed to protect the high cost U.S. producer. 4 days later, the Soviet Union announced its decision to purchase the full quantity cut by the U.S. The move was not based on need, since the Soviet Union produced large quantities of sugar. After 1961, the Soviet bloc and China absorbed the bulk of Cuba's sugar harvest. Due to the payment of sugar being primarily bartered, only 20% in convertible currency, the purchases worsened Cuba's ability to trade in the world marketplace and made it more difficult for Cuba to remain diversified. A Lockheed-built Polaris A-1 Fleet ballistic missile was the first launch in history from a submerged submarine, the USS George Washington. It occurred July the 20th, 1960, off of Cape Canaveral, Florida. Within 3 hours, a second Polaris test missile was launched. On November the 15th, 1960, the submarine and its 16 Polaris A-1s began its first patrol. An international diplomatic crisis erupted in May when Russia shot down an American U 2 spy plane over the Soviet airspace and captured its pilot, Francis Gary Powers. Confronted with the evidence of his nation's espionage, President Dwight D. Eisenhower was forced to admit to Russia that the CIA had been flying spy missions over Russia for several years. Russia convicted Powers on espionage charges and sent him to 10 years in prison. However, after serving less than 2 years, he was released in exchange for a captured Russian agent in the first ever U.S. Russia spy swap. The U 2 plane incident raised tensions between the U.S. and Russia during the Cold War. It wasn't just a Cold War between US and Russia. The space race was well underway, launch after launch of either a rocket or a satellite. The US had 29 launches with 16 successes and 13 failures, while Russia had 9 launches in which they had 3 successes and 6 failures. L.W. Warzeka from Cuero was a professional engineer in Texas and in New York with General Electric. He conducted an early feasibility study of a manned moon landing. He led GE support of NASA Houston on the Apollo program and managed multiple GE businesses in aerospace, defense, and electronic areas. When he retired, he was vice president of General Electric with 40 years of service. Animals in space. Here are the Mousetronauts, Sally, Amy, and Mo frolicking about on their life cell, which was launched nearly 700 miles high and 5,000 miles out over the Atlantic missile range. At this press conference at Cocoa Beach, Florida, the scientists report that Sally, Amy, and Mo are as good as new. Miss Sam, a rhesus monkey, was launched on January the 21st, 1960, for another test of the launch escape system. The Mercury capsule attained a velocity of 1,800 miles per hour with an altitude of 9 miles. After landing in the Atlantic Ocean, 10.8 miles downrange from the launch site, Miss Sam was retrieved in overall good condition. Captain Joe Kittinger, a test and fighter pilot, was the first man to jump from space from an altitude of more than 100,000 feet above Earth, about 3 times higher than commercial airplanes. The United States Air Force performed one of its most dangerous aerospace experiments. This was a multi stage parachute system test that would provide a means of escape for pilots forced to eject at high altitudes. On August the 16th, 1960, it was not a rocket but a fragile balloon with a box like gondola and only his pressure suit and helmet for protection from the deadly space environment. As he was going up, the glove slipped off his right hand, causing it to swell up like a balloon. But Joe was still able to successfully complete the jump, and his hand was fine a few days later. Let's talk about the money. $100 in 1960 was the equivalent of $870.92 today. $500 was the equivalent of $4,354.80, and 1,000 was $8,709.38. Minimum wage was $1.25 per hour, and a hamburger cost 20 cents. Sugar was 38 cents for 5 pounds, and a new house cost around $12,700. And a new car was $2,600, with a gallon of gas being 25 cents. In the spring, HEB opened in Cuero. H.E. Budd Sr. holds the red ribbon while Mayor J.T. Newman cuts it and officially opens the HEB grocery store in Cuero. The Cuero Police Department, with a personnel roster of 9 persons, gives the city around-the-clock protection 365 days a year. There is at least one person on duty at station headquarters 24 hours every day. Prior to this, the city had night watchmen, which generally consisted of volunteers. While Cuero gained 24-hour protection, other places, such as New York City, dealt with people beating up the police officers. President Eisenhower paid a surprise visit to the 1961 General Motors exhibit at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Eisenhower was escorted through the 5-room display of new models. Chairman Frederick G. Donner. The president waxed an enthusiasm over his Chevrolet Greenbriar sports wagon, then stated, "Gee, this would be swell on the farm, you know. I haven't had a driver's license for 38 years. I'm going to have to get me one." Reverend Norman A. Sanders Aquero is one of 3 Texans to win a free use of a Studebaker for 1 year. He selected a 4-door sedan, which was delivered by Cuero's authorized Studebaker dealer, Gay Implement and Motor Company. The 1960 solar-powered automobile, Baker Electric took a 1912 model car and placed a solar cell on top, turning it into a solar-powered vehicle. It took around 8 to 10 hours to charge the batteries and offered 1 hour of drive time at 20 miles per hour. Cartoonist Ben Windsor, a special service illustrator whose Medal of Honor series, A Man to Do a Man's Job, appears periodically in the Hawaiian Lightning News, received a first prize scholarship from the National Cartoonist Society. Ben was a 1940 graduate of Cuero High School. In 1942, he married Opal Young of Danbury, Ohio, who is in the photo with him. Buck Schewitz, a national known and popular Cuero artist, publishes a book. With eyes on Texas, the book contains drawings and paintings of his native state. They are structures of historical significance. The book contains 96 black and white drawings and 16 colored paintings that were selected from 40 years worth of his artwork. Buck graduated from Texas A&M as an architect but never practiced his profession. Today his art can be found in various museums and collections across the country. Coca-Cola celebrates its 50th anniversary with an open house at the bottling plant. Door prizes were given away. 1960 proved to be a year of new happenings in Cuero, with the opening of the Cuero Pecan House by J.F. Elder, which was primarily a seasonal operation. Annette and Irwin Rath purchased the Pecan House in 2003 and decided to stay open year round and offered even more tasty goodies. Another new to Cuero, K.N. Root Beer Drive-In, opened by Jimmy and Mary Arnold, became a huge hit with the locals. It quickly became a Cuero tradition and is still known to this day as the Gobbler Hangout or the dive for the football players. KN is just down the hill from the high school, within walking distance for lunch and an after school treat. When former Cuero residents come for a visit, KN is always on their must eat list. Cuero High School moved to their new location on the hill. Cuero ISD had two football teams, the Cuero Gobblers and the DAULE Rams. They shared a stadium on the corner of Henry and Prairie Streets. The Cuero Gobblers did not have a good season. 0-9-1. On November the 11th, 1960, during the Turkey Trot, they lost 88-0 to Kingsville, resulting in their worst loss ever. On the other hand, Dolly Rams had more success. But on November the 11th, 1960, they lost the district championships to the Wharton Wolves 12-6 in Cuero. Shout out to the junior high Turklets football team for winning District 24J and being undefeated for the year. Dole homecoming was quite the celebration, kicked off by a parade, bonfire, and a pep rally. Then the football game, and followed by an open house at Dole School with a book fair and movies of the Seguin and Wharton football games. Dolores Reed, a homemaking student at Dole, received an award at the State Fair in Dallas for her election as the third state vice president of the new Homemaker of America. A 1960 Dole graduate, Leona McNeil, makes history by becoming the first black female to be enrolled in the agricultural program at Prairie View A&M. Up until that time, Black women only learned general housework, cooking, and laundering in the industrial program. The Summer Olympics was in full swing, being hosted at Rome, and the Winter Olympics was hosted in Squaw Valley, California. The paper reads, Lynn Burke, 17-year-old lass, who's being counted on to bring America its first Olympic women's 100-meter backstroke title since 1932. The Flushing, Long Island beauty has broken both the 100 and 200-meter backstroke records. And may we remind the history repeats itself, set that 1932 Olympic backstroke champ Eleanor Holmes, also a New Yorker, and sure enough, Lynn brought home the gold. Quirrell's gold medalist, Fred Hansen, was attending Rice University at the time and training to win the gold in pole vaulting at the 1964 Olympics held in Tokyo. The competition was a grueling 10 hours, and it usually takes 4 hours. Hansen takes the win at 5.10 meters. A blizzard like snow, the morning of February the 12th, was considered a freak snowstorm with hurricane force winds that stretched from West Texas throughout South Texas over to southern Louisiana and into the northeastern Mexico, which killed a total of 6 people. Quail typically only sees measurable snow about every 10 years, but not with these grueling winds. The snowfall total was 5 inches in Cuero. New York City experienced an immense tragedy in December when a mid-air collision occurred between a United Airlines Douglas DC-8 and a TWA Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation when descending into LaGuardia Airport, killing everyone in both aircrafts which was 128 people and 6 people on the ground. It was known as the deadliest aviation disaster in the world until 1968. On February 23rd, at 11:45 p.m., a 5.8 magnitude earthquake shook Agadir, Morocco. Usually, an earthquake of this magnitude is considered moderate, but the quake was shallow, only being about 9 miles deep. The earthquake is known as Morocco's most destructive and deadliest, killing nearly 15,000 people, a third of the city's population. Rescue work was difficult due to the scorching heat, well over 100 degrees, as well as the level of destruction. After 2 days, the city was evacuated to avoid the spread of disease, and rescue workers had to wear gas masks and spread quicklime over areas that were considered hopeless for survivors to control disease conditions. The King, Majesty Muhammad V, ordered the city to be rebuilt at a new location and commissioned his son to oversee the process so that it could be built to withstand seismic activities. Hurricane Donna, at Category 4, was the fifth strongest hurricane to hit the United States, causing 50 deaths, 387 million in property damage, and affecting over 50 million people. After swiping the Florida Keys and striking land near Fort Myers on September the 10th, deadly Donna did not travel along the usual path that storms of her magnitude usually take. Instead of heading back to the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf of Mexico, Donna took on the unusual distinction of being the only hurricane of record to produce hurricane force winds throughout the U.S. East Coast from Florida to the mid Atlantic states. 100-mile wide eye later crossed Long Island. The Huntsville prison in Texas volunteers inmates to test the new Sabian polio vaccine. Jonas Salk had great success with his injectable vaccine until the Cutter Lab incident, in which they failed to kill the live polio virus, and it began to infect those that received the vaccine with a full blown case of polio. The polio vaccine was suspended for about 5 years until the Albert Sabin oral vaccine became available. The vaccine covered multiple strands of polio. Mass trials began for this new vaccine in 1960. In Cincinnati, Ohio, a mass polio vaccination trial gets underway. Kathy Clark, age 5, opens wide to take her half teaspoon dose of cherry tasting vaccine. President Eisenhower announced April the 12th as Vaccination Day against polio, being it was the fifth anniversary of the announcement of an effective polio vaccine, and the day that celebrated polio victim President Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away in 1945. Locally, Dr. Harold High, the city health officer, recommended that those that have not received polio vaccines to do so before summer begins, which is peak polio season. On October 25th, the west side of Cuero flooded due to heavy rains. This prompted free typhoid shots to be given to the public. Over 1,000 people received injections over a 3-day period administered by the city health officer, Dr. Harold High. Typhoid is an infection caused by Salmonella bacterium. The infection is often passed through the contaminated food and water. The symptoms are high fever, diarrhea, and vomiting. It can be fatal if not treated soon enough. In 1960, they had antibiotics to treat it, but the germ quickly became resistant to treatment, so it was better to get the vaccine to prevent the disease. Crow had several pharmacies in 1960. Here are advertisements from a few of them. L.L. Buttery Drugstore went on to become the Pharmacy and Medical Museum of Texas, which is like walking back into the late 1800s. And it even has an iron lung that was used during the polio epidemic. Dr. John C. Davis became a licensed aviation medical examiner and can now perform physical examinations on airmen for the administrator of the Federal Aviation Agency. Raymond R. Reese was elected to the Alpha Omega Alpha Honorary Medical Society at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. Dr. Jenkins referred to the honor as an early symbol of a fine career of service and responsibility and the great tradition of medicine. And indeed, Dr. Jenkins had that right. Dr. Reese has been a fine doctor and is still practicing in Cuero. Leonard F. McCollum from Cuero was a philanthropist and oilman who built Continental Oil into the integrated worldwide energy giant known as Conoco. In 1960, he was named chairman of a five-member export expansion committee, which was organized by private industry to promote a trade expansion program. He was also the vice chairman of the Business Advisory Council for the Department of Commerce, as well as the chairman of its Committee on International Trade and Commerce. Guadalupe Valley Cotton Mill was a leading industry in Cuero and was the town's largest employer with 428 employees. Cuero was also home to the Cuero Cotton and Oil Manufacturing Company. Cotton was grown locally in DeWitt County and proved to be a huge industry for the town. An estimated 500,000 turkeys raised in DeWitt County brings in 3 million. The turkey is a celebrated livestock in which Cuero planned a festival around every 4 years called the Turkey Trot. Nowadays, Cuero celebrates the Turkey Fest on the second weekend in October. The Great Gobbler Gallop is a race between Ruby Begonia, the Cuero turkey, and Paycheck, the Worthington, Minnesota turkey, to see who can claim to be the turkey capital of the world for that year. The first heat of the race takes place in Worthington at King Turkey Days, and the second heat is in Cuero during Turkey Fest. A regiment of turkeys, a small portion of the 5,000 that appeared in the 1960 Turkey Trot Parade, are shown making a right turn at the corner of Main and Esplanade Streets at the Cuero Federal Savings and Loan Association building. The State Highway Department officers helped local police handle traffic. An excess of 50,000 people watched the parade. The Turkey Trot was an elaborate, elegant celebration held in Cuero every 4 years to celebrate the turkey and how the turkey industry helped the locals. The Turkey Trot started in 1912, and the idea came from the fact that every year more and more people showed up to see these turkeys herded from the country into town to the slaughterhouses. It was before they had trucks and trailers to haul them. It was decided to have a celebration of a huge magnitude to welcome people to town and share this experience with them. 1972 was the last Turkey Trot, and then in 1973 the Turkey Fest started, and the lavish costumes were a thing of the past. A Turkish-style celebration was in order because Turkish, turkey, and they wanted to be different than any other festivity around. Just look how glamorous Sultana Mary Ann Cruthers and Sultan E.T. Summers look in these photos. In the junior division, the honor was held by Junior Sultan Henry Shepherd III and Junior Sultana Delula Rush. The coronation ceremonies were held in the lavishly decorated Cuero High School gym. Today you can view these amazing costumes and many others in the Turkish Palace located within the Cuero Heritage Museum on Church Street. Cuero has a very unique history, and this museum is dedicated to preserving and sharing it with others. Fishing at Cuero Municipal Park Lake was fantastic in 1960. The big catch was hefty-sized bass. The Works Progress Administration built the park between 1935 and 1937, which consisted of a lake, golf course, clubhouse, swimming pool, entrance portals, and a baseball stadium. Water skiing was also enjoyed on Cuero Municipal Park Lake, although not anymore today. The park has expanded over the years to include a basketball pavilion, multiple day rentals, a gazebo with native plants, a walking trail, rodeo arena, the Fire Ag Center, softball field, a fourplex Little League field, a volleyball area, a knoll for movies and concerts and plays, large fenced playground, and a splash pad. In 1960, DeWitt County gets a new jail, bidding goodbye to the three-story brick building that was the county jail since 1917. This jail was center stage for one of Texas' most famous disputes, the Sutton-Taylor feud. July 1960 until June 1964, the United Nations operation in the Congo marked a milestone in peacekeeping in the terms of the assumed responsibilities and the size of the operation area and the manpower involved. It included an important civilians operation component, as well as a peacekeeping effort of nearly 20,000 officers and men due to the military intrusion of Belgian troops. It provided the Congolese government with military and technical assistance following the collapse of many essential services. Quickly they became entangled in chaotic internal situation which went beyond normal peacekeeping duties. Elephants on the move. The biggest elephant trek in Africa's history, Operation Timbo, involves 23 men guiding 2,000 elephants from the east coast of Tanganyika to Solis Game Reserve, several hundred miles south. The wild elephants were so damaging to the crops that the game department decided to have them relocated. One very bad man down. On May the 23rd, 1960, Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion announces to the world that Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann has been captured and will stand trial in Israel. Eichmann, the Nazi SS officer who organized Adolf Hitler's final solution to the Jewish question, was seized by Israeli agents in Argentina on May the 11th and smuggled to Israel 9 days later. The Greensboro sit-in was a civil rights protest that started in 1960 when Ezell Blair Jr., David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Joseph McNeil, young African American students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College, staged a sit-in at a segregated Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and refused to leave after being denied service. The sit-in movement soon spread to college towns throughout the South. Although many of the protesters were arrested for trespassing, disorderly conduct, or disturbing the peace, their actions made an immediate and lasting impact, forcing Woolworths and other establishments to change their segregationist policies. There were times that someone unknowingly makes a huge mark on history, as did Ruby Bridges, the brave young girl that desegregated a school in New Orleans. Daisy Gabrielle was called a communist in countless racial epithets, and she was told that her child Yolanda could get a disease from being in an integrated school with Ruby. She had reluctantly removed Yolanda from school early on that first afternoon, fearing for the girl's safety. But that night she decided it wasn't right to give up, so she took Yolanda back the next morning. It was the principle of the thing, she said. Only one other white child remained enrolled in the school after that day. The school with 3 children quickly became just one, only Ruby, due to the parents losing their jobs and being forced to move for employment. As an adult, Ruby saw the Norman Rockwell painting for the first time and said, "Oh, wow, I didn't know he painted a picture of me." And her friend stated shockingly, "You're that Ruby?" Oh my, JFK is a Catholic. Yes, 1960 was one heck of an election year. There were some that thought Christianity would be a thing in the past if John Fitzgerald Kennedy was elected president of the United States. He was even called a communist and socialist. Earl John Dietz is one of 50 page boys, one for each state, at the Democratic Convention in Los Angeles to assist Lyndon B. Johnson. John Earl was a junior at St. Mary's majoring in pre-law, and since then went on to become a prominent attorney here in Cuero. Letters to the editor. The wives of 2 local doctors went back and forth with letters to the editor. Miss L. B. Landry was for Kennedy, and Jackie Hall was for Nixon. Other letters to the editor and articles included Polly and Jack Howerton, the newspaper editor and wife, being for Nixon, Elsie Wendell for Kennedy, and William V. Holt was neutral, neither for Kennedy nor Nixon, due to them both wanting to repeal the Connolly Amendment. It was a popular misconception of the American people at the time that the UN would be the judge of all Americans due to the Connolly Amendment, and the UN flag would fly above the American flag. The amendment was only referring to matters of international issues such as land disputes, waterways, etc. It was only established after World War II to keep peace in the world and not have another world war. Polly Howerton, the wife of the newspaper editor, had a daily newspaper column called Pollywogs that kept up with the happenings of the locals. Locally, Crow had in Nixon Lodge, the Republican campaign headquarters on North Esplanade, which had campaign literature, buttons, bumper stickers, and the likes being handed out by volunteer workers. Pictured are Joe Royce, Monroe Cooper, Milton Buell, Carl Parr, John Means, Miss Jo Royce, Frank Stanford, Miss W. B. McClung, T. A. Royce, Nick Cameron, Miss E. O. Hall, Miss E. H. Nelson Jr., Lou Kay, Miss Ray Liggett, and Miss T. A. Royce. There was also a Democratic campaign headquarters for Kennedy, located on East Main. Volunteers also distributed literature, buttons, and bumper stickers. Pictured are Thurman Claggett, Jim Payton, Mayor J.T. Newman, Mr. and Mrs. Bonnie Binger, Miss J.T. Newman, Miss Al Respondick, Miss Frank Shepard, Henry Ludwig Jr., and Frank Shepard. The 1960 presidential race was like watching a good boxing match, in which the country was pretty much divided right down the middle on who they wanted to be their next president. Both men had their share of haters too. Vice President Richard Nixon was mailed a bomb. Here you see Fran Fichet holding a package with a string to pull. The bomb contained an auxiliary simulator and liquid aluminum explosive component that is capable of maiming at 25 feet and killing close up. Shortly after the election, JFK had an attempt on his life by a retired postal worker, Richard Pavlik, who was stalking him. Pavlik loaded his car with dynamite, headed to Florida to blow up Kennedy and himself, but delayed it because Kennedy was with his family. Pavlik was caught before trying again. The 1960 United States 44th presidential election was held on Tuesday, November the 8th. To vote in the election, a poll tax was required, which had to be paid by January the 31st for the November election, and it was the last poll tax that was collected for a presidential election due to the 24th Amendment eliminating it in 1964. There was no early voting, and ballots had to be counted by hand. Nixon carried the victory in DeWitt County, even though the state of Texas went to Kennedy. In a closely contested election, Democrat United States Senator John F. Kennedy defeated incumbent Vice President Richard Nixon, the Republican Party nominee. This was the first election in which 50 states participated and the last in which the District of Columbia did not. Kennedy won 303 to 219 electoral college victory and is generally considered to have won the national popular vote by 112,827, a margin of 0.17%. Kennedy relied on Lyndon B. Johnson to hold the South and used television effectively. Despite this, Kennedy's popular vote was the narrowest in the 20th century. On November the 30th, 1960, Vice President Nixon decided not to dispute the votes and cause a recount. He planned on running again in 1964 and did not want to taint his name. Christmas has always been a well-celebrated season in Cuero. This season's greeting ad is from the Fair Department Store, which was a town favorite for quite a few decades and a fond memory for many. The city of Cuero hosted an annual Christmas light decorating contest every year. This has now been replaced by a spectacular annual light display, Christmas in the Park at Cuero Municipal Park. Christmas in the Park is a drive-through open nightly the Monday before Thanksgiving through New Year's Day, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., with donations appreciated to help it grow. There are over 250 lighted holiday displays with animated scenes, and every year it grows more and more. Come experience the beautifulness of Christmas in the Park in Cuero. And there you have it, 1960 in a nutshell. As you can see, some things have changed a little over the years, but some things seem very familiar even 60 years later.